The moment Deuteronomy D. Wagstaffe realized something was profoundly wrong was when the universe cleared its throat. Now, I don't mean thunder. It wasn't the wind. It was a very distinct, very awkward, throat-clearing sound that seemed to come from everywhere, and nowhere all at once. Deuteronomy Doy. For short, and never. Ever Doity was a golden retriever of impeccable moral character and predictable habits. He operated on a simple, deeply held belief all problems could be solved with either patience, a well-timed snack, or just lying down dramatically until things sorted themselves out. He lived a peaceful life in Barkington Hollow, a charming town populated entirely by animals who had, through a silent, mutual pact, agreed to pretend everything was completely normal, always. This long-standing agreement shattered at precisely 8:03 a.m. On a Tuesday. That was the moment Deuteronomy's own shadow peeled itself off the ground, stretched languidly, and spoke. Before you panic, it said in a dry, unimpressed voice, "Just know this was not my idea." Deuteronomy barked so hard he actually startled himself. Next door, the window of Mrs. Ginger Snap, the perpetually unimpressed ginger cat, cracked open. "If this is about your shadow again, Deuteronomy," she sighed, "take it up with management." "I don't have management." Deuteronomy howled back, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated confusion. His shadow casually checked an invisible watch on its wrist. "We're already behind schedule. Behind schedule for what?" That question was left hanging in the air, because at that exact moment, the sun blinked. Just once. A quick, cosmic wink, like it had forgotten something important but decided it was too much trouble to follow up. Deuteronomy, a dog not equipped for blinking celestial bodies, promptly sat down with a thud. This was way above his pay grade. By mid-morning, Barkington Hollow was in a state of mild, yet escalating, disarray. The river, apparently out of spite, had decided to flow backward. Birds were getting into heated arguments with their own reflections and somehow losing. A goat down the lane received a very cryptic letter that contained only for words, "We need to talk." Mayor Pennington, a basset hound whose ears dragged along the ground like forgotten responsibilities, called an emergency town meeting. "Order," the mayor said, his voice thick with emotion as he started to gently cry. "Please order." Professor Whiskerton, a local raccoon who wore unnecessary glasses and possessed an alarming amount of self-confidence, stood up on his soapbox. "It's simple, really," he announced to the anxious crowd. "The universe is becoming narratively unstable." Silence. You could hear a pin drop. In fact, a hamster fainted, landing directly in the middle of a perfectly good sandwich. Deuteronomy, finding his voice, asked the question on everyone's mind. "You're saying reality is breaking?" "No," Professor Whiskerton replied, adjusting his glasses. "Worse. It's improvising." As if on cue, the sky flashed a brilliant shade of purple for a moment, then sheepishly returned to blue, as if apologizing for the interruption. Deuteronomy's shadow leaned in close, whispering conspiratorially. "This is the part where you become important." "No, thank you," Deuteronomy said firmly. "I respectfully decline importance," but the ground beneath him had other ideas. It gently, but insistently, scooted him forward toward the professor anyway. Things escalated that fast. Time itself began to stutter, but only on Tuesdays. Background music started playing without any explanation, often at very inconvenient moments. Animals would find themselves entering rooms already in the middle of conversations they hadn't started. A duck in the park suddenly discovered he had a tragic backstory and was quite upset about it. Professor Whiskerton, ever the intellectual, assembled a small, unlikely group to fix things, the mission, journey to the center of the story and restore order. The team consisted of Deuteronomy, who was there completely against his will, Mrs. Ginger Snap, who seemed to be there against everyone else's will, Leonard the Turtle, a stoic reptile who had frankly seen worse, a llama poet who mostly just rhymed the word moon with moon, and of course Deuteronomy's shadow, who had invited itself. But no one knows where the center of the story is, Deuteronomy pointed out, hoping this would end the whole endeavor. In response, the ground opened a trapdoor right at his paws. "Oh," Deuteronomy added, defeated. "That feels targeted." The journey made less and less sense the longer it lasted. They crossed a vast desert made entirely of outdated opinions. They slogged through a swamp where every footstep triggered a cheesy laugh track. They climbed a mountain that kept insisting it was actually a metaphor for personal struggle. At one point, they came across a single, floating door labeled character development. Deuteronomy, being a practical dog, simply walked around it. Coward, his shadow muttered, but there was an unmistakable fondness in its tone. When they finally reached their destination, it was underwhelming. The center of the story wasn't a grand library or a cosmic engine. It was a hamster wheel, and inside it, running with all his might, was a very, very tired mouse. "I can't do this alone anymore," the mouse panted, his tiny legs a blur. "There are too many subplots." Not enough resolution. As he spoke, reality flickered violently. For a brief second, Leonard the Turtle began speaking fluent Italian. The llama poet suddenly became self-aware and started apologizing for his limited rhymes. Then the mouse stopped running, and everything froze. The sky paused mid-blue. All sound took a lunch break. The world held its breath. The mouse looked directly at Deuteronomy, his little eyes filled with exhaustion. "Your turn." "No," Deuteronomy said, his tail drooping. "Absolutely not. I fetch sticks. I take naps. I do not stabilize existence. You care?" The mouse replied simply. "That's the only qualification needed." Deuteronomy looked around. He saw his friends frozen in absurd positions. He saw the beautiful, chaotic mess of his world. He glanced at his shadow, who for once looked sincere. "What happens if I don't?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The shadow's form seemed to soften. Then the story ends unfinished. Deuteronomy took a deep breath. He looked at the wheel. It looked like responsibility and panic all wrapped in cheap carpet. With a heavy sigh, he stepped inside. As he began to run, a strange thing happened. The universe steadied. The sky seemed to exhale in relief. Time unclenched its fist. The river downstream went back to minding its own business. Even the llama stopped rhyming. Deuteronomy ran and ran and ran. Eventually, the little mouse nodded, a tiny smile on his face. Good enough. Barkington Hollow returned to something that resembled normal. Strange things still happened, of course, but now they happened politely, with a bit more consideration. Deuteronomy walked a little slower these days. His shadow no longer talked. But it always stayed close, a silent companion, sometimes at night. Deuteronomy would look up at the stars. They didn't blink anymore. And for the very first time, Deuteronomy D. Wagstaffe, the golden retriever who just wanted a simple life, felt okay being part of the story, even if that story was wildly, unapologetically. And wonderfully out of pocket, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this tale from the edges of reality, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow for more stories. See you next time.